So yeah, so great question. So let's address that. So genetics is what you're born with, and we've learned about gene genetics for a while now, and it's like, yeah, you inherit certain traits and characteristics and whatever from your parents, obviously. Epigenetics is something newer that we're learning, which is more like how your genes are expressing, meaning just because you're given genes doesn't mean they're harmful or not harmful. It depends on your lifestyle factors and what you can control to determine whether these things express or not. So, for example, we may have talked about the ApoE4 gene. ApoE4 is known to be a gene that's kind of been a longer, it's been with us for a really long time. And it turns out that it can be really protective against infections, but it also can cause Alzheimer's. So essentially, if you have an ApoE4 gene, one copy, you have like a double likelihood of getting Alzheimer's than somebody who doesn't. And if you have two, um, so you're heterozygous, you've got both, you have like a tenfold. I can't remember what the numbers are, but it's a much greater likelihood that you're going to have Alzheimer's. If you watched the Limitless series on, was it Netflix with Chris Hemsworth? They basically talk, every episode's like a different health expert, and they talk about different longevity, health, whatever things in every episode. And one of them, he learns that he has two of those copies and freaks him out, rightfully so. Nobody wants Alzheimer's, of course. So he's got a greater disposition. Now, again, the good news is it's your behaviors that determine whether those things actually happen or not. So, for example, we have lots of people who have two copies of ApoE4. They don't have Alzheimer's. We also have people who don't have a single copy and they do get Alzheimer's. So there are certain things that you can express or not express based on your lifestyle. And as that relates to health span and lifespan, it's really interesting when we look at indigenous populations. Like here's a really good example. We've talked about this guy before, Weston A. Price. This was a dentist who in the 1930s wanted to chase some of the roots of chronic disease. So this was the guy who took a camera around all over the place and investigated the teeth and dental structure and overall health of people all over the world, and found that like the places he wanted to go were places where there were, some of the population were living in cities and some of the population were living adjacent to them the way that we'd always lived. So you can see like two different populations in a very similar area with the same genetics. These guys have beautiful, amazing teeth with wide jaws and have room for all of their teeth, don't need extractions of any kind, versus people who live the same genes, just in a different way. The Western food had already made it to them, and you could see the dental decay is awful in these people where it's still good there. And so that was the whole, the name of his book, which is Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, and he was kind of chasing that down. When we look at those populations, they have a lower average lifespan than we do in the Western world. But the reason for that largely is because they don't have a lot of the same, not only treatment for chronic disease, but also things like we've got better at treating things like heart disease, which a lot of them don't have. Childbirth is a really big one. So they lose a lot more children in childbirth, either the mother or the child, than we do in a medical system when you can go to the hospital and it's such a high likelihood that your child is going to survive. If you think about that, that obviously is going to skew the average of how long somebody lives. But what they find is if somebody can get through childhood, they live really long lives. Like some of the tribes, they don't even know how long these people live. It's not like they have birth certificates and really track it, but they, from what they know, it's like 110, 120-year-old people, and they're like active and dancing, and like I've heard stories of people that have traveled to these tribes, and like the 90-year-old mom is dancing with her 120-year-old mom, and they're like jumping and active and like all these crazy feats. And again, we don't know exactly what their ages are, but we know just based on how many generations live together, they've lived incredibly long lives without any type of chronic disease. So again, all that to say, like, the medical system has helped us increase our lifespan, but primarily because we can keep kids alive for longer, and we can keep very, very sick people alive for a really long time.
In those tribes that are exhibiting that extended life, is there form of death? Because here, diabetes, insulin resistance, heart disease, there, my guess would be that one night they go to sleep and they don't wake up.
Yep. Yes, really interesting perspective on this is a movie Magic Pill, which was on Netflix forever, and curiously, it's not there anymore, and I can't find it anywhere. Very strange. But they go to a tribe who, I believe they were Aborigines in Australia, and they were starting to get really sick. They were eating Western foods, and so all of them had diabetes, and they were eating just crappy food, which we'll talk about today. But they asked them the question, like, how do you guys die? When somebody in your generation dies, how do they die? And they look around and they go, obesity, diabetes, mental disorders, that kind of thing. And then they say, well, how about your parents and your parents' parents? How did they die? And they have to think about it a little bit, and they say infections, tuberculosis, like more infectious diseases. Yeah. And then they said, well, what about before them? How did they die? And they kind of looked and thought about it, and they were like, old age. You just get to a point where you go to sleep and you don't wake up again. You're like you're describing. So, yeah. So again, related to epigenetics and genetics, unfortunately, we have these amazing modern lifestyles and all these really cool tools available to us in different ways to make food that we never had, and like ways to transport and refrigerate and save foods and package foods in different ways. It's just we've done that relatively so recently that our genetics have not caught up to any of that. And so we're getting really, really sick, and we can, with pharma and with the medical system, we can keep people alive in a very, very sick state for a long time. Even something like type 1 diabetes. Like type 1 diabetes, if you had it 100 years ago, you're dead. Now we have insulin, so we can keep you alive, which is good. So you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And antibiotics. Nobody here is going to say antibiotics are terrible. Like, save billions of lives probably, but it comes with some downsides that we're discovering. So, great question. And actually, really good segue to what we're going to talk about today, which is what not to eat. 3 of the worst foods, quote unquote, foods to avoid. We can go as in-depth or as surface level on this as you guys want. We did have some feedback from our friend Greg. I was just telling these guys, lad, Greg has been following along some of the videos online, but he says he misses hearing you guys because the microphone might be a little bit far away. So if you do want to be heard on the video and have your question answered, the microphone is there. If you're talking closer to it, you'll be on. If you'd rather not, that's fine too.
No, I can move. It is irritating when you hear this.
And then I can just make up whatever I like after that. Really. Now I'm held accountable. I kind of do that anyway. True. I'm held more accountable now. Okay, so before we start, I just want to review chronic disease. What is chronic disease? Can anybody tell me what they think of when they think of the word chronic disease?
Something you're dealing with for a long time.
Perfect. What is an acute disease?
Something that goes away.
Sudden.
Sudden goes away.
Maybe it's not a disease. Yeah.
Something sudden pain and uncontrollable.
COVID, maybe an injury like you break your arm is an acute emergency. You need to get that dealt with right away. Chronic diseases are really tough because they're exactly what Margie said. They manifest themselves over decades. It's not something that's easily studied because you don't get heart disease in a week eating something. If there was, we'd have answers to a lot of these things so much easier. You don't get, Alzheimer's right away. Like, all these things take so long to kind of manifest themselves. That's why they're chronic and why we call them that. And so they're hard to figure out the cause. They're hard to kind of treat. They're hard to study. It just is. Like, what are you going to do? Like, have a group of 1,000 people locked up away for 50 years and only feed one group one thing and another thing, another group another thing, and then find out what happens after 50 years. Like, you can't do that. So it's very problematic. But chronic diseases, again, they manifest over a very long amount of time, and that's largely kind of what we're talking about today. You could go out and eat any of these things that we're going to talk about today, and you wouldn't die. We eat these all the time, and you don't die. The body is really good at sorting things out if something's not great for it. You have infection, there's a response, and you get rid of the infection and you live. It's amazing that a lot of people out there can live literally on these things that what I'm considering like the 3 worst foods that you could eat. There's people that only eat these 3 things and they live for a very long time. So it's quite impressive that your body can deal with a lot of these things. Yeah. But again, it's a matter of how good you want to feel, how healthy you want to be, and how far back you want to push that kind of like drop off in your health as we're aging? Do you want to deal with something at a younger age, or do you want to push that off until you're at a much later age? So the things that I put on here is the 3 foods that, quote unquote, foods that are best to avoid. The first one is sugar, and I would say like most refined carbohydrates and fructose. The second one is going to be refined grains, so the grains themselves. And the third thing is vegetable or seed oils.
Where did this drink meme come from? That
These-
is incredible.
these
that
are
Mike's
great.
Lemonade is lower in sugar than all the rest of them.
These are great. Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of it will also depend on the quantity. Like you see the one that's like the bigger Mountain Dew versus a smaller Mountain Dew. So a 12-ounce Mike's Hard Lemonade might be, because it's 12 ounces, it has a little bit less. But yeah, it's showing less than any of those other
Still,
things.
even less than orange juice. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And less than Red Bull, which is insane to drink,
I
in
know.
my opinion. But okay.
I know. It's wild.
But that's just counting sugar, not the other stuff that makes
Yeah, I can't tolerate those energy drinks anymore.
Right. Besides the caffeine and what other ingredients are in there, your dyes, what makes a certain color can't be, whatever makes Mountain Dew the color green, I'm guessing is not like the best thing ever.
Yeah, but if you drink Baja, it's blue.
Really?
Yeah. Baja with Mountain Dew.
Oh, yeah. So a different one. So yeah, maybe that dye is way better for you since it's blue. I'll quote The Simpsons and Homer eating a jelly-filled donut. Hey, it's purple. Purple's a fruit. It's healthy for you. Yeah.
Vitamin water. Sugar.
Yeah, apparently quite a bit, actually.
What water?
Vitamin water.
Oh, vitamin water.
Yeah. There is a doctor in the United Kingdom who is famous for putting these together. He's got a lot of different infographics. His name is Dr. David Unwin. Again, I've got pens if you need to write anything down, but if you want to look him up, he's got lots of these charts. He had been preaching to a lot of his patients that, like, you're eating too much sugar, we need to get rid of the sugar. He had been practicing medicine for decades, and a woman who was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes came to him and said, I've got off my medications on my own. I'm actually quite pissed off at you, and I want to report you. He's like, what are you talking about? He's like, you never taught me that I could reverse this. I found this information from somebody else, and I reversed my condition. I'm thinking about like reporting you. I'm pretty ticked off about this whole thing. And so he, as a doctor, had to go, oh, wow, okay, like better look into this. And sure enough, found the link between chronic disease and the things we're eating, and it was able to help. He's reversed type 2 diabetes now in over 100 of his patients, and
Yes.
like literally reversed it.
Yes.
No medications, that kind of thing. And in all his years of like preaching and trying to help people understand how much sugar was in stuff, he found that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and he started to make a lot of these infographics that were quite helpful for people to look and say, oh, wow, that's a lot of sugar. So sugar is the first one. We talked about this extensively last week when we talked about insulin resistance. So we learned that when we intake sugar, think of every single one of those. Is a cube of sugar, is that 1 teaspoon? That would be 1 teaspoon, right? So remember that at any given time in your blood, you have 1 teaspoon of sugar circulating around, one of those cubes. So when you take any of these into your body, very fast acting, very quick absorbing, again, Mike's Hard Lemonade, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cubes of those sugar. You are basically multiplying the sugar in your blood by 9 times. And that is, again, a fluid. The sugar has already been dissolved. It gets into the body very, very quickly. It can be absorbed in the mouth, absorbed through the stomach. It doesn't need to be digested as much as it just gets like passed through the gut. That is a huge, and I'm going to say this carefully, but I'm comfortable saying it. This is a toxic load of sugar in the body. That much sugar should not be consumed by anybody at any given time, especially all at once. Sugar in the body is an emergency.
Right.
Now, again, we talked about this when we talked about insulin resistance. You do find sugar in nature. It's out there, and we can eat it. And to some extent, we deal with it really well. We have an emergency system that kicks in to clear it out of the blood in particular, because sugar is toxic. Eating sugar is an emergency inside the body. Again, strong statement. I feel pretty comfortable saying it. When you consume sugar, the first thing your body does is says, we got to deal with all this sugar. This cannot be here. It is highly inflammatory and very toxic inside the blood vessels, where it can cause lots and lots of damage. Again, we talked about that significantly. So your body kicks into action and starts to want to deal with the sugar, in particular, in the blood. This is also another good note to say that your body is always trying to protect yourself. When you see somebody who's 600 pounds and you think like, wow, how are they that big? Their body is revolting against them. Like, no. That body is saving that person's life by allowing them to gain so much fat to temporarily put all the stuff that it can't deal with in an emergency. It has to deal with the emergency first. Your body never thinks like, oh, I'd like to live until I'm 90 years old. Right. It thinks like, we have a problem now. We'll figure out the 90 years old thing later. Emergency now. We need to deal with this. So the emergency system for sugar is the sugar gets in the blood, that then goes to the liver, which then this energy is converted over the course of several hours over to fat, which is packaged up in the liver by a particle called VLDL, very low density lipoprotein. We talked about this in the cholesterol episode. That loads up with fat and cholesterol, and it goes out to the body to stuff extra carbohydrate or mostly fat into fat cells to be able to be stored to be used later. What that does is it drops the blood sugar back to a safe level, and now you have stuffed away the sugar that you have consumed, and your body doesn't need to worry about it because it's stuffed away in storage. Insulin, again, is the primary hormone that does that. When you do it occasionally or rarely, it's not a big deal. Your insulin will go high. You take the high blood sugar. The high insulin makes the blood sugar go down to normal level. After a few hours, the insulin can come down to where it needs to go. It's back down to a baseline, and it's not really a problem. Again, this is an emergency system. You want to think about this not running very often because sugar in a natural environment is exceedingly, exceedingly rare. You just don't find it very often. Usually it's very seasonal. It might be certain parts of the planet. It just isn't available all the time everywhere the way it is today. One type of sugar is also called fructose. We know most of us consume fructose in the form of high fructose corn syrup, which is a combination of glucose and fructose together. Glucose itself is the form of sugar that you have in your blood, and it's the not very sweet version of carbohydrate. So like bread initially is not very sweet, but if you kept it on your tongue for a little while, it would start to taste sweeter as your basically the enzymes in your mouth start breaking it down. It starts making it sweeter. You can put a piece of bread on your tongue and it doesn't taste like anything at first, but then it's like, oh, it tastes sweeter. That's glucose, essentially. Fructose is a combination of glucose and fructose together. It's found in fruit. And I recently interviewed somebody who lives in Australia. He's a doctor I mentioned before. His name's Dr. Gary Fettke. He's another doctor who got into hot water with the medical system as he was doing more and more diabetic amputations in his career as an orthopedic surgeon. He started to realize, like, as these patients were in the hospital, by the guidelines in Australia, they were receiving ice cream 3 times a day. It was part of the guidelines to be able to get that. And he's, again, lopping off bits of people's feet and their ankles and their legs, thinking like all of this damage is caused by carbohydrates. Yet when people get to the hospital, we're giving them loads and loads and loads more sugar. This is ridiculous. He ends up almost losing his license. He goes to trial for several years. It forces his wife, Belinda Fettke, to research who are the people that are behind the prosecution of my husband, who's literally just saying, like, get sugar out of hospitals. And it was all of the cereal companies. She was the one that discovered the link between the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the cereal companies and how they were started back in Battle Creek, Michigan, where all the sanitariums started, how the Seventh-day Adventist Church invented all the nutrition schools 100 years ago, and they wrote the first textbooks, and to this day, like, they write all the guidelines and have a lot of influence on nutrition. She had to do that to help save her husband, who eventually was exonerated from everything, but he literally went to trial. One of the talks that he gave is how much carbohydrate is toxic, and especially related to even things like fruit. And I'm not willing to say that fruit is necessarily a problem for most people, but fruit is literally designed the way it's given to us by nature and the way that we eat it and what happens to us in the body. It is extremely fattening, and it's perfect because you only get fruit, again, very seasonally. So if it's the end of summer, early fall, you see some fruits available. You know that natural fruits, again, very rare. Before we started hybridizing and breeding everything, like a natural apple is tiny. Cherries are generally very tart. We broke your heart.
Huge.
We broke your heart with the watermelon. Remember the picture of the natural watermelon? It was like this tiny, seedy, fleshy, whatever. I always think of like remember the Seinfeld bit where he was like, we have scientists working on cancer and heart disease, but we've also figured out how to have watermelon that don't have seeds. Like the scientists that are figuring out like can't spit out seeds. We can't have that. We finally did it. We created the seedless watermelon, which again is a
Just without fuzz. As recently as the 60s, I was in Brigham City rubbing peach fuzz off of the peaches.
Yeah, right. Don't have that
find
anymore. Don't have that anymore. Yeah, a seedless watermelon is like, I mean, if you think about it from the plant's perspective, this is like you're killing. So now we don't have babies. Like the whole purpose of a plant is to propagate and spread, just like us. Like they want to live and have a life and spread their seed. If they have no seed, you're just basically making these like sterile plants that you're only using for your own devices. You wanted the sugar. We all want the sugar. We make apples that are this big. We refrigerate them. We wax them. We ship them all over the planet. They are kept in silos. Remember, birthday apples. Most apples at a store over a year old, been picked over a year by the time you get to it. That's the difference in some of that food. And again, this doctor doing all his research on fructose and sugar in particular, the dosage of carbohydrate, sugar, fructose that is toxic to you, in his opinion, is about the same as the amount that you have in your blood at any given time, about 1 teaspoon, about 4 grams. It is a very, very low tolerance. That's very bad news for most of us. The good news is if you can keep your sugar very infrequent, try to not have it very often, or if you know yourself, we're going to do a whole thing on food and sugar addiction. If you know that you're not lad,
I know.
unfortunately, for the rest of us, if sugar is been shown in studies to be as addictive as cocaine, and you're unable to stop, then you may find that you have to abstain from sugar completely. You may have to abstain from some types of carbohydrates completely. Sucks. I don't like it. That may just be the case. A lot of that is just knowing yourself and what you can tolerate. Again, running that.
Being a drug?
What's that?
What's wrong with being a drug?
It's
You need more and more each time.
It's great. It's great. I did an episode with somebody just yesterday who was also, she's an abstainer. She learned that if she has a little is not a problem. But the problem is when a little leads to more and more and more and more and more, then it becomes a problem. And
It's there.
if you can have,
I admit I did binge on Lay's last night. And I even brought them into the house myself. I was craving the salt and oil on a Lay's, and I'm like going, okay, I know this is poisonous, but I'm eating it anyway.
Yep. Literally that's what they're designed to do. Like when food companies design a food, they start with what properties do we want, what labels do we want to put on it, and then let's decide what combination of sugar, fat, and salt will hit this magical place in your brain that you literally just cannot stop. It's made to be addictive. And again, the point we made in this interview is like, if you were a drug addict and you really like cocaine, what if there was this alternate universe where rather than, discovering how to make sugar really cheap, maybe we discovered how to make cocaine really cheap. And now in any store, you can just buy as much cocaine as you want. You can go to the hardware store, and as you're checking out, there's an entire wall of lots of different varieties of cocaine. And it's summertime, so the kids over there at the park are selling cocaine in lemon water for $3 a cup. You know what I mean? Like that would be a really tough place to be if you really liked cocaine, and cocaine was so readily available everywhere.
That way in the early days, actually.
What's that?
Cocaine actually was marketed that way in the early days.
Kind of, yeah. Coca-Cola. That's where Coca-Cola got the coca from, was from cocaine. They put it in there. It was a health thing, and they found, it gave you lots of energy, for example. Like, of course it did. So yeah. There you go. Yeah, it really was like a health remedy that would be promoted, and I believe Dr. Pepper had a little bit in it as well.
Yes, it did.
Did it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what they do is they, obviously backed away from the cocaine and just filled everything with more sugar to make it as addictive as possible for people. Some people, it's not that addictive. They can have the fruit, they can have in small doses, they can have it seasonally. Um, it's just, again, the point is that what you would be consuming on a natural landscape when there's very limited fruit for a very limited amount of time, you're in competition with birds and squirrels and whatever animals that are also eating all of this fruit. All of that also is benefiting the fruit because these creatures are consuming the fruit, pooping out seeds so the plant can continue living.
Right.
It's a good symbiotic relationship. It's very fattening, which is great because you store fat that time of the year. And then when the fruit goes away, you have to live. Good thing you stored the fruit, the fat. Now there's no more sugar, no more fructose. Insulin stays low. Other hormones like glucagon say, okay, well, we don't have carbohydrates coming in, but we stored all the fat. Let's get that out of here and we burn it off. So you're able to live between that and eating proteins and fats. I figure we covered this one enough. If you guys have any questions about sugar, please let me know. Do you guys have any questions? Sugar itself?
No, why doesn't glucagon kick in more easily? Because 2016, my doctor said you're too thin, you got to eat. So I packed in the sugar, lemonade, things like I was drinking lemonade like water.
Yep.
That Simply Lemonade.
Yep.
Have you checked out the added sugars in that
Oh
thing?
my gosh.
Holy
Yeah, it's a lot.
shit.
Yeah.
But that stuff is so tasty.
Yep.
2018, I show up your doorstep because I've got the muffin top.
Yep, right.
And it's like it happened in just 2 years. I went from you're dangerously thin to you have too much fat on you now.
And that's the curse about the blessing about being somebody who can stay very, very lean and you don't have the number of fat cells that a person would have to get up to 600 pounds.
Right.
So it's nice that you won't ever get morbidly obese, but the downside to that is you'll have all the same metabolic issues at 160 pounds and be like, what is going on?
Right.
Yeah, that's the
we've talked
blessing
about
and the curse
visceral
there.
fat issue. Here I am thin, but that body composition scale is telling me you're still too high on visceral fat.
Yep, that visceral fat is fat that's found inside of the stomach. It's not the fat that all of us hate, the jiggly, not very cosmetically appealing fat. Is called subcutaneous fat. It's underneath the skin. Ironically, we all hate it. We wish we had less of it. It is very healthy fat to have. It's great. It's the fat you want. It's energy that you have. You can burn it off. It can go away. It can reduce, whatever. But it is healthy. You need it. Right? Even, getting very, very lean is unhealthy for a lot of people. Like, you want the fat. It helps you. Visceral fat is different because remember, when you're consuming carbohydrates, especially when you're consuming fructose, since fructose doesn't elevate blood sugar, it has to be dealt with by the liver, and the liver is then depositing fat outside of the liver. So now you could be, we discovered this when kids would start to get liver disease, and we're like, wait a second, like with an adult, they got liver disease. Well, yeah, because they were drinking, they were an alcoholic, they're taking a lot of alcohol, of course you get liver disease. Younger and younger kids especially are now getting liver disease, and it's like, well, they're not drinking, so how are they getting liver disease? That's fructose. That's directly related to fructose consumption, and that's what we call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD is what it's called. And that is another chronic disease is hugely on the rise, again, just based on how you metabolize sugar and fructose in particular. So unfortunately, very low doses are considered really safe if you want to stay metabolically healthy. A sugary thing every now and again is not a problem. Think of all of these things we talk about today as like smoking a cigarette. Is it good? No. Can you smoke a cigarette every now and again and not get lung cancer? Probably. There's always going to be a question. You still probably shouldn't, but again, these are accumulation issues over a long period of time. So
I think most of us know that the sugar is a problem, but stopping it is a bigger problem.
Yeah.
And so I get this dilemma. Well, when there's an artificial sugar, which do you do? And then I'm like, I don't like the benefits or the side effects of the artificial. So then I choose the real sugar over the other.
Yep.
It's confusing.
Yes, it is very confusing. I change my mind about this every 2 minutes, so I'm not going to be very helpful for you. On the one hand, it's like if sugar is a toxin, it's a chemical, and it causes a lot of problems, then maybe an artificial sweetener would be better. And I agree, and I like to think of it as a bridge. If you're getting off of sugary soda and you have diet soda, probably going to be a little bit better for you.
Or is that the excuse to be able to drink or consume even more sugar because you're thinking it's artificial?
Great question. And we know that
0 grams of sugar.
We know that people who consume diet soda on paper consume less calories, but then that sugar or fake sugar still caused an insulin response, which now your blood sugar is dropping. So now you're hungrier for something else. So they've shown that people who consume diet sodas actually end up consuming more calories as a byproduct. Neither one's great. I've argued the same thing. Like, look, if you're going to do a low sugar ice cream, what I now I'm to the point that I avoid it. I've gotten to the point now after a lot of weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, like thinking that I could.
Anyway.
They don't. That's the thing is like a low sugar ice cream will be like enough for me to be like, it's okay, but it doesn't really hit the spot. Now I really want real. Now I'm going to Nielsen's.
Yeah.
I want the real thing. So it's really debatable. Some people claim that like there's better ones. So like, stevia was a big one for a long time. Agave, people thought was way better, which ended up being not better at all. There's a new kind of movement of people that think that allulose is a really great sweetener and can actually be beneficial. I don't know. It's interesting arguments. I would say that again, since the sweetness in food was so rare, it's probably better that you just do the very best you can to try to move away from it wherever possible. How you do it,
it's tough.
It sucks.
And
it's
it
like
varies
Margie
as much
said.
as what we're talking about. Where I can one and go. My brother, he is literally allergic to stevia. Cannot take it. I can taste the bitterness in aspartame.
Yep.
Cannot tolerate it. Gives me a headache.
Yep.
So, and everyone's different. Whereas someone else, like you say, I have a friend who has fatty liver disease, drank diet soda for decades.
Yep.
And so I'm like, yeah, everyone's body
seemingly without any type of yeah. I know.
So
the other tricky thing, this is just so you know, this is actually from an author of a book called Carbivore.
Oh.
Might be a little surprised to learn that I interviewed somebody who wrote a book called Carbivore, who we had so much common ground on. We were able to do an hour-long episode where we talked about all the things we absolutely agreed on. And one of those things was reducing sugar.
What number is that one?
What's that?
Which do you remember?
It was about a month or two ago. Okay. So I did it in 2 parts because I did the first part where I interviewed her and we talked about all the things that we agreed on. And then as I was thinking about it the next day, I'm like, I'm going to do a second episode that's just solo where I'm going to go on all the things that she absolutely got wrong. Wrote about in her book that just either missed or,
What's her name?
Unfactual. Phoebe Lapine is her name.
I'll look it up.
But her book is called Carbivore. And again, lots of things that we agree on. And this is a list of added sugar and added sugar cheat sheet.
Okay.
So remember that when you're printing a label, you have to list all the ingredients in order by weight of what you put in there. We know that sugar has kind of moved out of fashion. In fact, according to numbers, this is hard for me to believe. According to numbers, we are consuming less sugar than we used to even 10, 20 years ago. Hard for me to believe. I want to know how they're coming up with that.
Especially with high fructose corn syrup.
I know. Maybe this is part of the reason why. Maybe white sugar is down.
Oh, yeah, that is.
It's fallen out of favor for me to print as the first ingredient in any food, sugar. But if I list that as number 5, and then number 8 is cane juice crystals, and ingredient 10 is golden syrup, and ingredient 15 is dextrin, and number 15 is rice syrup, you know what I mean? I've now found a way to list these things, bury them in a list of ingredients, because all of those are names of sugar. So if you want, you can, I don't know if you need to say it, but if you want to pass it around and just say like,
all sugar.
It's all sugar. It's all sugar. Yep.
What is xanthan gum? Do you know?
I don't. Isn't a binder of some kind? Doesn't it make things a little bit thicker?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that right?
But I didn't know if it was considered sugar, sucrose, or like maltodextrin and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Or if it was an emulsifier.
Is it?
It's a starch.
Mm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I should know that. I'm not exactly sure.
Well, it's hard to know all these things.
I know.
The back of a label.
I know. I mean, literally, this is all I obsess about, and all I've been obsessing about for 8 years, and I still get stumped all the time.
Now you can appreciate why I like these
slow learner.
I'm telling you, you and Bickman need to focus on these little charts for those of
Those
us
are
who
very
don't
helpful.
have time to
Yeah.
pursue it.
Another thing that I like about Bickman is, like, as much as he doesn't like social media,
Right.
he goes on social media to do little bits of things that actually help people, and people are on social media, so he doesn't have to like it, but he still does it to help the rest of us bums out.
You guys that you sent me that link on, that I haven't finished it yet, but I just about did. But that's a
Cool.
good conversation.
Yeah,
I was really happy to hear that.
He's so great.
Because yeah, we need the info out there, but gosh, you guys are doing it full time, and it's hard to keep up with.
Yeah,
It's
it is.
Now the average person, it's like,
it's impossible.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
Especially when you get conflicting headlines and cholesterol is going to kill you and this drug is so amazing for weight loss and all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, again, so that's the review on sugar. I think most people have realized, like, it can be problematic for most people. We talked about that a lot last week. I do believe it's a direct contributor to insulin resistance is a high sugar diet, because you're going to have lots of insulin. Your body's going to it's going to lower its insulin over time and fight back, essentially. The next one we're going to talk about is refined grains. This gets a little bit more complicated. And I definitely wanted to put our good friend, the food pyramid, on this one. Who doesn't remember the food pyramid? 1990, 6 to 11 servings of bread, pasta, and rice recommended to every man, woman, and child in America. This was a healthy diet. Wasn't it great?
Spaghetti every night.
6 to 11. Then, then the next one up is 3 to 4 servings each of fruits and vegetables, which again are lumped into the same thing, even though those are completely different. And even just 20, 30 years ago, when the food pyramid came out, fruit was very different, like we talked about. And then use sparingly was the things like, well, not sparingly, but 3 to 4, 2 to 3 servings each of milk, cheese, and then meats. So even then, not like fully demonized, but you can see like the biggest meat that they list there in the picture is chicken. This was kind of when, you'll even see it says meat. It doesn't say beef. The next one is poultry. The next one is fish. And then they even have things like dry beans and nuts that they promote. Interesting to see that they do show an egg on there. But again, the max serving a day that was recommended was 2 to 3 eggs a day. And that would be it for your protein category. Used sparingly would be things like sugar. So they did talk about that. Added sugar in particular. And then fat. Refined grains. This is an interesting story that goes back about 10 to 15,000 years. As we evolved as humans, we were hunter-gatherers. We would hunt for our food, and we would gather whatever food was available to us. About 10 to 15,000 years ago, we started agriculture, which means we started to take grasses and grow them for our uses. Basically, there was a form of grass called einkorn that got mixed with a breed of grass called goat grass, if I'm not mistaken. And the two of those ended up making a plant have more innate pesticide and allowed it to yield more of the actual seed itself, which was the grass, essentially. So if you look at most grasses, most native grasses, there's like a tiny little part where you see the seeds on the very top. It doesn't yield a bunch. A native grass, again, when we started agriculture, could yield a little bit more, and it became a viable kind of food substance. And so different cultures around the world started cultivating grasses. We call it domestication. We domesticated grasses for our uses. And then we kind of changed the way we started living, and we're more reliant on grasses to provide food. We started to settle down. Civilizations began. Land became vastly more important, and the protection of land became more important. Weather became more important, because if there was a drought, you would then have a famine and everybody would die. You had to, again, protect your land. And so before, like when you were hunting and gathering, you didn't need to protect your land. You just move somewhere else. If you didn't have enough berries or animals around, you just go somewhere else where they have them. With agriculture, you need lots of land. And so now you need armies, and you need to decide with grass and the seed, you now have a commodity. So most fruits that you have, or most meat that you have, it's going to go bad. And so you can't infinitely store those types of food because they go bad. A commodity is something that you can store and save and use for a very long time. This is a first for humans. And so now you have a need for figuring out exchanges. Now you need currency. Now you need armies to protect, again, where the land is coming from, the resources where the land is coming from. You care about water. You need water to do all this, the growing of all these plants. That's irrigation started. You also needed to make decisions about who was going to get more grain and who was going to get less grain. How do you decide that? Now maybe you have governments who are running things and storing grains and deciding who gets more of what, and that leads to wealth and more money, and all this stuff just starts driving out of this one thing called the refinement of grains, which again, we'd never done. We have to look back and ask the question, did we refine grains and grasses, or did grains refine us? We are completely different now. We are completely subservient to these grasses, who are now like the biggest crops on the planet. If you drive through Nebraska, you'll know that is true. We're basically beholden to this grass, essentially, with where we are and how we rely on our food. That was a very gradual change. Again, several thousand years ago. The more kind of abrupt changes came when starvation after World War II became a bit more of a concern, and we learned that wheat could be a very, very good thing that we could share with the world and move around so that people wouldn't starve, essentially. And so that's when we really started crossing different variations of grasses to really greatly increase their yield and began to move them around. Another big thing that happened is we invented the roller mill. Does anybody know what a roller mill is?
Well, it's usually
how you get flour. Yeah, so the roller mill in Lehigh, yep, is what they do. So generally, has anybody seen a true wheat seed?
Yeah.
It's a seed. It's a hard, impossibly tough kind of a seed. Has anybody made their own bread?
Yeah.
Like from a wheat seed?
Not that long ago.
But most of the wheat we buy, even to preserve and save, has already been stripped of its layer.
Exactly. Yep. With the wheat seed or the wheat berry, the only way you could get it down to something you could prepare for something like bread is you needed to soak or you need to ferment in some way. You also needed to grind it to open up all the nutrients to be able to use. And the way that used to be done is stone grounding. So you take a stone, big flat stone, you have another big flat stone, you pulverize everything, it comes into a powder, but you preserve the germ and the harder bits and more of the fiber and a lot of the nutrients, including polyunsaturates, some of the fatty acids. You preserve all of it. The problem is part of that goes rancid, goes bad, doesn't have a very good shelf life. When we invented the roller mill, we were able to create flour, which I believe removes the endosperm and the bran, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Now what you're left with is flour, which is this innate, some taste, but it doesn't have any real nutritional quality. And it just is kind of the flour. There's nothing really that special about it. In the body, it acts a lot like sugar, meaning it gets into the blood very, very quickly. And it doesn't really have a lot of nutrients to it, which, again, if you know things like Wonder Bread, what is Wonder Bread? Well, it's the bread that is so devoid of nutrients that they fortify it with nutrients. So basically, you're putting more of the crap that you already took out of it, you're putting it back in. So one thing that's really interesting is anytime you walk into the bread aisle, you know the smell you get in the bread aisle? You know that smell? That's actually yeast. So you have to add so much more yeast to the bread we didn't have to add before. Now we do because we took all this out. Now we're throwing more minerals, which are rocks, basically, into this bread. It won't rise. So now you have to add tons and tons of yeast, and that's what you smell when you walk down the bread aisle. Anyway, once we were able to refine the grains into flour can stay really good, mostly indefinitely, unless I remember as a kid, we had weevils once get into all of our flour. That was I remember, a really gross problem. But you can keep that for a really long time. It's, again, devoid of most nutrition. It acts like sugar in the blood. And it can be very, very problematic. So some of the problems that we have with relate to some of the proteins. I think most of us know somebody who has celiac disease. We know about gluten. A lot of people can't handle gluten, whether they have celiac or not. Another component is glandin, which is a protein that can cause lots of damage for certain people. There's certain anti-nutrients called lectins that are in wheat that can help open up your intestines and allow things to leak through. If you've ever heard of leaky gut, that can be a cause of leaky gut, where your body is having an inflammatory or an autoimmune reaction to foods that shouldn't be there. So think about COVID. What was the thing that actually killed people during COVID? It wasn't COVID itself. It was your body had a reaction, and they would overreact. So not only was it killing, anything that had a spike protein, it would freak out and kill healthy cells and just react to everything. And people got ARDS, which is like an acute respiratory kind of syndrome where your body would attack its own lungs. So that's what inflammation does in the body. These foods are highly inflammatory for most people. And again, we think back and we think about like, okay, but bread and grains have been with us for a very, very long time. How have we not adapted with these? We've used them for a really long time.
Exactly.
How is this not a better food for us today if we've been eating this for so long?
Right.
We have learned that some of the longest lived cultures who have been eating bread for the longest actually have super high rates of celiac disease. So Egypt, for example, people in Egypt, it's like a 50% rate of celiac disease that people have in Egypt, and they've been eating grains for a very, very long time.
Right.
Also, we open up mummies. They were eating cereal grains in the form of porridge and very rudimentary forms of bread. They had atherosclerosis. They had heart disease. You can see that in mummified remains. We also can look back on skeletons. This is another really telling. Go ahead. Do you have a question?
Why isn't like you say? Why aren't we epigenetically, even over the centuries, adjusting?
Epigenetically. Hopefully, epigenetically is how we're responding to our genes.
Right.
Our genes don't change overnight. That's kind of the problem, is we're introducing a food that was never consumed in the quantities that it is today, namely grasses and seeds.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Why isn't the body responding to that thing that we're doing to it?
We may.
It takes time.
It takes time.
Well, yeah,
Great
it's
answer.
been centuries, like you said. It's been centuries and centuries.
That's how long some of these changes take.
Oh my God.
Could be, centuries is nothing compared to evolution.
Right.
Yeah, and we also think about evolution as this kind of like a really like kind of a steady curve of we're just like evolved. Like we know the picture of like the monkey and it walks and then all of a sudden it turns into a human, and we think of it as a rate step. Evolution, as it turns out to be more of like a drastic change that stays the same for a really, really long time. Drastic change that stays the same for the really, really long time. Like the first humans, their skeletons look a lot like ours. They had brain sizes that were a lot like ours. We may have been able to have perfectly normal conversations with them. They may have at some point figured out how to use iPhones. Like they were very similar to us in a lot of different ways. But it is the epigenetics, or the way we have created changes in such a relatively short amount of time. Again, if you think about it, like hominid evolution is a week. We maybe started eating grasses 2 minutes ago.
Yeah.
It's just not enough time for something that we're just not well adapted to. Okay. An animal that is well adapted to, think of animals that eat grasses all day long. And they have to eat grasses all day long. So cows, sheep, deer, elk, whatever. These are all called ruminant animals because they have what is called a rumen. A rumen is a digestive chamber. They have multiple of them where they're fermenting grass, but the fermentation process makes short-chain fatty acids that is then their energy. So it's crazy to think, but next time you drive by a pasture of cows, they're eating 100% carbohydrates and running their bodies on fat.
Right.
Because of the fermentation. We don't have that same gut. We don't have that same capacity. Our fermentation chamber is our large intestine. It's tiny compared to other animals. Right. If we were using grasses as fuel, we would have fermentation chambers and way larger large intestines, where ours are tiny. We have big small intestines that loop around forever. That's where you digest proteins and fats primarily. It's what allowed us to walk on 2 feet versus 4 feet. Now we adapted to be up and alert and upright, and we can do things like throw versus other animals that can't throw. They can hang, but they don't throw the same. It's part of how our brains evolved and changed over time. It takes a really, really long time to be able to do. Again, one of the big tellers that we can see is we can look at skeletons that came from the time period where we started to consume more of these grains. We see bone deformities, we see dental issues, huge problems. We see that we started shrinking, and we saw for the first time in our evolution that our brain sizes started to shrink. Our brain sizes maxed out about 15,000 years ago at about 1,500 cc's, and they're now about 10% less, about 1,350 cc's. So we are unfortunately becoming less smart.
How long ago was that?
About the introduction of when we saw grains become a staple part of the diet.
Several thousand years.
10 to 12,000 years ago, generally speaking.
Okay.
Yep. We could go on and on and on and on about grains themselves. Again, I'm going to take this from the author of the book Carbivore. This is somebody who is pro carbohydrates in the diet, wrote an entire book, primarily a cookbook, about carbohydrates. Again, I agreed to interview her because I found so many common talking points. You wouldn't think I would find very many common talking points with somebody who promotes carbohydrates, but there was a lot that we agreed on, which is great. This is in her resources list. These are the carbohydrates that she recommends. She does talk about avoiding sugar. She does talk about things like the problem with, common pastas and bread and things like that. So these are some of the recommended grains and carbohydrate sources that you should be using in your diet. Legumes, heirloom beans, oats, gluten-free steel-cut oats, rolled oats, and oat flour, so gluten-free. Ancient grains, buckwheat groats and roasted kasha, organic whole millet, quinoa, gluten-free sourdough bread, gluten-free yellow corn polenta, heirloom masa harina, organic gluten-free yellow cornmeal, almond flour gnocchi and lasagna sheets, brown rice penne fusilli and spaghetti, buckwheat soba noodles, gluten-free lasagna sheets and linguine, gluten-free orzo pasta, millet and brown rice ramen, organic brown rice pad thai noodles, rice vermicelli noodles, black rice and jade rice, sprouted grain gaba rice, sushi rice, and wild rice.
That donut looks better.
Yes, it does.
Do any of you eat one of those things?
Oats.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oats. Are they gluten-free? Steel
so.
cut rolled or oat flour?
Yes.
Okay.
I get the steel cut stuff.
You made the list.
I love it.
You made the list?
I like oatmeal. But then they throw that damn sugar in it.
You got to make it taste good. If it's going to be low fat, it's going to be sugar in there.
Quinoa.
Quinoa.
Yeah, that's
quinoa. This to me.
All of these salads that come
Yeah.
out.
Kale.
This to me is part of the issue. Again, I know how wacky this sounds, but this is called botany. This is just science of plants. Every plant is toxic, period. Every plant you eat has toxins, period. You can find ways to detoxify them. Some have more, some have less. Some are problematic, some are not. If you tried to eat that bush, you would probably die. If you had a few pieces of fruit, you would probably not die. Right. All fruit has toxins. All plants, have toxins. When I hear that, yeah, you can have refined grains, but they need to come from this list, and you need to take tons of steps to detoxify them, meaning, again, who in here has done sourdough bread? I used to make sourdough bread all the time. You have the wheat berry, you grind it up, that's the whole flour. The only other ingredients are water and salt. You have a yeast starter that is basically a pet. You have to feed it and take it off and feed it and take it off. The strain I had came across the plains with the pioneers. It was like 200 years old. It was awesome. But yeah, like I could not take vacations without literally somebody watching my sourdough starter. You would make this bread. It took 2 days. You would soak the grain. You would ferment the grain. It would make these loaves of bread. It was the best bread I've ever made in my life. It was absolutely delicious. It was delicious for about 24 hours until it was about as hard as this column, literally unedible. I could throw it and break a window if I wanted to.
You better have a crowd.
Yes, I was giving away tons because there was no way. As much as I love my avocado toast, I couldn't eat that much avocado toast. I would give it away and just like, this is going to be good for today. And love it and eat it and consume it and whatever. Every plant has toxins. When you're talking about grains, you're talking about the plant's babies that are going to be reinforced the most. That's just nature. It's called botany, like I said. So you have to do things. You have to try to find natural grains that haven't been messed with, haven't been screwed up by the way we genetically modify things, and then you have to find ways to detoxify it. Can you do it? You can do it. Absolutely. If you like to do it, go ahead and do it. I think it's easier to skip the whole kit and caboodle because there's nothing in here that is necessary. You don't need it. We like it. If you want to go through the process that we had to go through before.
It's part of the addiction, though.
It is. It can be. Again, if anybody wants, I can pass this around if you want. Phoebe Lapine is her name. Very lovely woman. She's great. Phoebe. Phoebe Lapine. If you can find the book by searching Carbivore.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, grains for a lot of people can be very, very problematic because, again, most of you are not buying buckwheat and soaking it for 2 days before you consume it. It's just not what we do. Something to think about, again, can be very problematic for a lot of people. I know tons of people who benefited from getting them out. The third, for any questions on refined grains? Again, refining just means separated. We took a wheat berry, separated, we have flour, anything that's made with flour. Another thing just to point out, next time you're at the store, look at foods that never should have had flour in them, wheat in them, and get a kick to yourself that, like, instant Campbell's soup has wheat. Twizzlers has wheat. Granola bars has wheat. Like, you just walk through the store and read, and you'll see it freaking everywhere. Be like, what? Why? And a lot of it could very well be the addictive properties of it. If you're a food company and you want people to consume more of this stuff, put it in everything. When was the last time you had a granola bar? And they're tiny now, but when was the last time you had a granola bar and you're like, oh, that hit the spot. I'm good for 8 hours.
No,
not so much.
It's interesting. My partner bought some of those Rhodes bacon serve things.
Yep.
And she bought the Texas. Anyway, the most refined white roll, raised white roll you can get. I'm telling you that even plain, for me, those things are too sweet.
That tells me your taste buds have changed.
Right.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing about our taste buds. If you experience a period of abstinence where you want to take these things down, you will recalibrate what tastes sweet. Like an apple is like almost overpoweringly sweet. Did I tell you about the cherry I picked off my client's tree? Like, she was like, I can't believe you're eating that. I'm like, wow, this is tart to you. This is so sweet to me. It's totally different. So yeah, white bread in particular, can be very, very sweet taste. Good point. It's a great question. If you could, again, like if you have found somebody who has made sourdough, that's a way better step. You're taking the plant, and the fermentation process and the soaking process has literally deactivated some of the toxins in the plant. You're going to handle that a lot better. Is whole, we get the question all the time, is whole grain better than white? And it's like, well, kind of, but like, it's also like saying, is a filtered cigarette better than an unfiltered cigarette? They're both not that great. And to call something whole grain, it's like, I think you need like 51% of it to be whole grain and the rest of it can be whatever. If it's like the really, like, again, like big seedy, they're tough to eat, but they're made with a lot of that fiber and plant material, like that might be better, and you're not going to absorb a lot of it because of the fiber. Fiber is indigestible. You pass it through. Same with corn. We all know that corn basically looks about the same as it comes out of you than before. It's not like you're using these nutrients. It's just passing through. So those can be like antidotes to some of the issues. But I mean, this is why a lot of people will eat sandwiches that have lettuce wraps.
Yeah.
Or things like that, which is like, if you don't do that great with bread, it's probably better to try to find hacks around it. It sucks. It's not convenient, but a lot of people choose to do that. Yep. Yeah. I think varying degrees of like better than worse or whatever, but yeah. Again, it's probably another one that I would submit that more people that step away from it, probably the better, especially if you notice chronic disease, if you have rheumatoid arthritis, if your bones are not strong enough, if you've got IBS, IBD, everybody has leaky gut and IBS and IBD. And like, what is getting into these tight junctions in our, guts? That's one cause. What is making the damage that we talked about during the cholesterol episode? What is making the damage to the arteries? Is it cholesterol that's an antioxidant that you produce in huge amounts? Or is it something else that's foreign that's, bashing around in certain areas of the bloodstream and causing damage? The last one, this could be its own thing by itself. I didn't make it its own thing. We'll just spend a little bit of time talking about it today, is vegetable oils. Next time you are at the store, after checking all the labels to find where wheat and sugar isn't anything, go to the oil section and go find all of the vegetable oils. and walk row by row by row by row and see shelf after shelf after shelf after shelf of vegetable and marvel to yourself that not one single drop has come from a vegetable. None of it. How they were able to name vegetable oil is astounding to me. But they did, and we now have vegetable oils.
Wait, what about corn oil and sunflower
Ooh,
oil? What happened to those?
that is great. I have here a nice little list called Know Your Fats.
Okay.
These are a nice little list of anything that you can have. This came from a book that just came out called Dark Calories by Dr. Kate Shanahan. I just got to interview her.
Okay.
She's an angel. Her book is fantastic. She is not a fan of the American Heart Association, and she is not a fan of Dr. Ansel Keys. I thought Nina Teicholz wrote some pretty aggressive things about Dr. Keys. Dr. Kate takes this to a whole nother level. Like, not a fan. If Dr. Keys, exactly. If Dr. Keys was alive, they would not be exchanging Christmas cards. We'll just say that.
So Dr. Keys is
Ansel Keys.
Dr. Ansel Keys was the one in the 1950s who kind of created the idea called the lipid hypothesis that stated that when you're eating saturated fat, you have more cholesterol. And if you have more cholesterol, you're going to have more heart disease. Right. The idea that was never borne out and proven, but it was the loudest idea that won the day. And since the American Heart Association already made financial partnerships with Procter & Gamble, who made Crisco, they were very ready to jump on and say, like, yeah, great, Procter & Gamble can keep paying us. We can keep promoting these oils in the diet, which are vegetable seed oils. And yeah. So this is a nice little list called Know Your Fats. Again, we can pass this around if you like. Saturated fats, I'm going to list them here. Butter and ghee, cheese, milk, cream, beef fat, cocoa butter, coconut oil, palm oil, and anything that is hydrogenated oil, which is a little bit weird, but like thinking that like Crisco could have actually been a lot healthier than some of the vegetable oils we eat today, and how he created trans fats, and actually like those could have been healthier than what we are eating today is pretty absurd, but is very much true. Saturated fats, remember, saturated fats have all the bonds that are saturated, so these don't have a tendency to react with oxygen. When Leslie tells us that she went into work at McDonald's and turned on the fry vat and it was solid and it was a good stable fat that you could cook with over and over and over again, that is a saturated fat. This is why Grandma cooked with bacon grease. It sat out on the stove. It didn't need to be refrigerated. It stayed good forever. Always save your bacon grease. Cook with it. It's delicious. Butter is solid at room temperature. You can heat it up to very high temperatures. It doesn't oxidize. These are the safest for the things that oxidize your fats, which are light, heat, and air. So you want to try to minimize that as you're dealing with fats. With saturated fats, they are the most tolerant to those three things, light, heat, and air. You should feel really good about cooking with them, consuming them. I eat butter like it's cheese. I'll literally just take bites of it if I want, and taste absolutely delicious. All those other things on that list are really great for cooking. Then we have monounsaturated fat. A monounsaturated fat has one double bond. The double bond is what can react with oxygen. So reacting with oxygen, think of TNT, an explosion. That's what TNT is. It's got 5 or 6 double bonds in the molecule that when they react with oxygen, they cause a chain reaction. If there's only one double bond, it's a very short chain reaction that doesn't create a lot of damage. A polyunsaturated means there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or multiple double bonds that then start a chain reaction, which causes lots of oxidation, lots of damage. So monounsaturated fats would be olive oil, avocado oil, peanut oil, lard and bacon fat, chicken and duck fat. And again, you'll see listed here partially hydrogenated oils. These ones are okay. They're best kept cold. It's risky when you're cooking with them that they're going to oxidize. So just if you're going to use olive oil, for example, in cooking, really great in a saute. You're just going to saute something for a few minutes at a medium to medium high temperature maybe. You're not going to really oxidize it in that amount of time. Probably not best to use for roasting. Like if you're going to roast a bunch of potatoes, roasting them in the oven would not necessarily be the best thing for olive oil because high temperature for a long amount of time means it can oxidize. Then you come to your...
I would assume that people are like, well, if olive oil is good for me, let me use it in all aspects, and then they deep fat fry, and that's where
yes. That's where it becomes worse. Great point, though. Still vastly better than what most people are doing with vegetable oils. If you told me that that was the one thing and that's what you were doing, I would try to negotiate with you on the frying and say, like, can we fry in like tallow or butter?
Skip the potatoes altogether.
I would maybe skip the potatoes altogether, but if you had done that where you were using canola oil before, I'd be like, okay, that is vastly better.
And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, they had us do the vegetable oils because we're probably thinking like the lard was it solidifies in the cold, right?
Yep.
So in our hearts,
Exactly.
we're assuming that this kind of fat will harden in our hearts, but we're at room temperature.
Great point.
We're kept
Great
warm.
point. The clog. Some of us are. Good point. They capitalize on the word clog. Who does not think of heart attack without thinking of clog? Even I today, knowing what I know about this, is you wonder, like, literally, I'm eating a solid stick of butter. I'm eating it like it's cheese. Totally. Yeah. It would not be uncommon. I mean this. For you to come to my house and grab the stick of butter and see my teeth marks on the butter. Like, what is this animal doing?
What is the difference between ghee and butter?
Ghee is clarified butter.
Why are the keto recipes recommending that over just using butter?
Some people don't do well with the proteins in butter.
Oh, no.
If you have reaction to butter, you might do better with ghee. Although I would argue if you do better with both, I think butter's better.
Okay.
Just cream.
Okay.
It's just cream that's hardened up. One of my favorite comic strips is
so the ghee doesn't have as much cream in it.
Would basically, and you can make it at home. You just take normal butter, cook it up, and then you scrape off the protein substance that comes, and then what you get left is clarified butter or ghee.
Right.
One of my favorite comic strips says, "What is ghee?" And the second one is like, "Oh, it's clarified. It's I can't remember. I'm gonna goof this up now, but it's like, is this maybe the first square is like, is this butter?" And the second square is like, no, it's ghee. And it's like, thanks for clarifying. Like, but I'm cheating. Clarified. So, yeah, all of those are fine. We are at room temperature. We're not like fish. Fish swim around in cold water, depending on some. So that's why fish have a very high amount of omega-3 fat, which is polyunsaturated, which is one we're going to talk about now. Fish oil is literally a polyunsaturated fat. It's an oil. You can refrigerate or put in a very cold environment, even to some degree, like frozen. You put your vegetable oil into a freezer and it doesn't necessarily freeze. It stays stays liquid. So fish in particular, again, don't use saturated fat because they're not mammals. They don't have high blood temperature. If your fat got hardened and you sunk, that wouldn't be a very good strategy for fish. They need oil. So that's what they use fish oil for. Okay, polyunsaturated fats, also called PUFA fats, polyunsaturated fatty acids, can include sesame oil, fish oil, flax oil. These are the ones I want you to remember. So you're going to hear 3 C's, 3 S's, and 2 others. What Dr. Kate calls these is the hateful 8. These are the ones that you want to avoid. Hateful 8. You name some of these. Yeah. First, corn oil. Second, canola oil. Third, cottonseed oil. There's your 3 C's. Okay? Corn, very popular. Mazola.
Yeah.
Canola, probably the most popular now, was only invented in the 1980s. Very much promoted because they'll talk about like a high smoke point.
Right.
All of these are all promoted because they will lower your cholesterol. If you take out your saturated fat and you add these in, your cholesterol will go down. I would argue that's very much not a good thing. Cottonseed oil. Cottonseed was the original, from the beginning, this was the original seed oil that made it into our diets. We had lots of cotton. We invented cotton gins. We're left with a bunch of cotton seeds. They have lots of polyunsaturated oils, which oxidize. They're exposed to air and heat, and they react, and they smell bad, and they're gross. Cottonseed, we learned how to refine, and then we wondered if we could put it in machines and lubricants and candles and soaps. And we figured out that if you hydrogenize it and make it into a solid, it looks like this really clean, white type of a fat that's made in a lab versus, again, butter and dairy that was pretty messy at the time. So the original seed oil that made it into our diets at a very high level commercially was, besides the fact that in the 1800s they were adulterating olive oil, they were putting in cottonseed oil into olive oil to adulterate it, to make it cheap. That there was a lot of people went to jail. There were a lot of scandals. Government did not appreciate that. But anyway, the original dietary form of this oil, cottonseed oil, crystallized cottonseed Crisco, 1911. first of the solid fats to make it into our diet. They came from polyunsaturates. It was hydrogenized, and again, Procter & Gamble, very smart about how they did their marketing, sent all the moms in America cookbooks. Here's how you cook with it and make your cookies and crackers and all this stuff way better.
The Wrigley scum effect.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly
That's
right.
how they got Wrigley gum off. They sent it to every household.
Yep. Yeah, it's great. Oh, this tastes great. I'll keep buying this. Like, yeah, of course. Great marketing. What's that?
Calories, right?
That's her book. It's called Dark Calories. It's really good. I got it on audiobook and I really enjoyed it. It was great. 3 C's: corn oil, canola oil, cottonseed oil. 3 S's now: soy, sunflower, safflower. Soy, sunflower, safflower. Again, polyunsaturated oils. They make it into our food system. You'll see these in a lot of products.
I'm sorry, which ones again?
Soybean oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil. Again, I think most of the time that's not necessarily like your cooking oils, but that's the oils that make it into a lot of the products.
In chips.
Yep, that's where you're going to find that. There might be a lot of frying tanks that either use corn or maybe a soy now. So yeah, those are the 3 S's: soy, sunflower, safflower. And the last 2 are grapeseed oil and rice bran oil. I don't see those a lot. Those might be cooking in like high-end like restaurants. Polyunsaturated oils. Again, these have multiple double bonds. The double bonds are reactive to what we talked about: light, heat, and air. When they're exposed to that, they can react and cause a chain reaction that causes oxidation. As Dr. Kate explains it, glycation is what happens when our cells are exposed to sugar. Glycation is what happens to toast. As you cook toast, a piece of bread is not necessarily sweet, but when you brown it, toast is like way better. Got more aroma and it's brown and it has that like kind of sweet taste to it. If you have a raw steak, it's not really that appealing, but if I stick it in my my flamethrower grill that heats up to 1500 degrees and I sear it on both sides and it develops this amazing crust, it's like drool worthy in 90 seconds, where, you know, plain piece of meat doesn't look that good. Those are reactions called glycation that make products really good, makes our food taste good. That's the browning effect. So when you glycate something, you create that kind of like a bit of damage. Your body can handle some glycation. It's okay. Your body will use the sugar, burn it off. It's not great. You don't want a lot of it, but you can have some of it. Oxidation is what we're talking about here. When these oils oxidize, they create chain reactions that cause a multitude of problems all across the body until that chain reaction is stopped. And I mean, it can go from cell to cell to cell to cell to cell, uncontrolled, affecting billions and billions of cells in a relatively short amount of time. I won't get into a lot of this, but Dr. Kate makes a very strong argument that the primary driver of insulin resistance is not carbohydrates as much as it is polyunsaturated oils.
I believe that.
Meaning you're using a dirty, oxidized fuel in the cell that the body can't use very much of. So the only other fuel it can get is the sugar in the blood, which it sucks up. And now your blood sugar crashes. Now you have insulin and blood sugar misregulation as you're craving more carbohydrates and eating that. And that is the primary driver of insulin resistance. That was a really poor explanation. She does a much better job of it, but it's interesting. It's very convincing.
Well, if you look at a label, you'll see that even more, in my mind, more ubiquitous than the carbs are the oils.
Seed oils.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
These now comprise about 20% of the foods that we consume. These consume about 25% of the foods that we consume. Yeah, maybe we'll take a little break. Everything's okay.
Somebody's not. We heard them sirens.
I saw the South Jordan city car pull up, and it's not obviously an emergency vehicle. Having a bit of a... I mean, they don't... Certainly not urgent.
No, someone may have passed.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah. Not great, but yeah, a few emergency vehicles in the neighborhood. Hope everybody's okay.
I don't know, though. If the lights are on, they're not gone yet. When my dad died...
Oh, good point, yeah.
They just send a hearse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so seed oil, this is the food that of any other food went literally from like, we did not consume this food a century and a half ago to now this is one of the biggest things that we consume in our diet.
Frying Southern fried chicken in lard?
So when we fried food in the past, yes, that because these did not exist. Literally, there wasn't.
Right.
These did not exist. These are invented.
Right.
Soy oil wasn't a thing.
Right.
We'll talk about the process of making these oils here in a minute. But yeah, you couldn't do it. You couldn't cook Southern cuisine any other way. You couldn't fry food in any other way other than some type of an animal fat.
Okay.
Or a plant fat. They just would have been exceedingly rare. So like, yeah, now you can go to the store and buy olive oil, but you couldn't do that 100 years ago. Like,
right. No.
we're making it in the same quantities, and that wasn't available in here, Utah. But if you took the fat, which you had a ton of because you had fatty animals, that was a big substance. You take the fat. Now you heat that fat up. You can roast all kinds of stuff in there, and yeah, you make whole cuisines based on that. So in the past, yes.
Okay.
But when we go through the history of what we went through, where we find that heart attacks are on the rise. We think it's saturated fat. Combine that with, we found industrial ways to turn seeds, a waste product, into something that could be beneficial, show that that lowers your cholesterol, and companies can make this very inexpensively. It's like this perfect storm of like, there's going to be huge backlash against anybody cooking in saturated fats that's going to fall out of favor. There's hilarious stories of not only what we cooked our foods in, but the formulation of foods. Like, the original Oreo used saturated fats.
Right.
It's the ingredient they had available. Well, saturated fats are bad.
Totally different.
So yeah, right. So now Nabisco is under huge pressure in the 90s. Now they have to reformulate Oreos.
Yeah.
But the taste has to be the same. You're just using different chemical properties. And it's like hilarious where like the frosting would melt or the crackers would break and like turn into crumbs. And like, it was a nightmare for these companies that are adjusting to this demand coming from the consumer of like, oh, we don't want saturated fat, we want snack wells, and they have to try to figure it out. It's a total disaster. So yes, we stopped frying and using saturated fats. We started using trans fats. We found out trans fats were bad for health. They've been banned since 2018. Now we are using
Only
just plain old. That recently. Yeah, we'd known about it for a while, but again, it takes a long time for food companies in particular to like just taper off of it.
They're not Europe.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Europe knows these things are not allowed anyway. But the problem is, since we're still so fat phobic, it's not like we said, okay, let's not do trans fats. Let's go back to saturated fats, which were fine. It's now we're cooking and roasting all these things in regular old vegetable oils.
Right.
So corn oil, cottonseed oil, canola oil, soy oil, again, safflower. That's what we're cooking with. Now, remember, these oxidize when exposed to temperatures, when they're exposed to light and air. So just know that when these already come in the bottle to you, if we go back to the picture that you see, this is the chemical process of the refinement of seed oils. You can look this up. You can find it in company like brochures and like textbooks. Like if you wanted to start a plant, it would be like multiple plants. You'd have to have all of these things in place. Again, I do what I do best, which is make these things like super small. Boiler, pressing stations, kernel stations. There's all kinds of storage tanks for oil and clarification stations. All of these different processes is what you need to do to go through to make vegetable oil come in the nice golden package that you see on the left of the picture. The picture that I took from the right is from the very first thing I listed in the resources. So the picture that you see of that sludgy, disgusting, gross thing comes from a video from the awesome TV show How It's Made. Remember How It's Made?
Yeah, how it's made. Yeah.
Basketballs and bicycles and tires and all kinds of cool stuff. You get to go into the factories and see how it's made. They do a whole episode, How It's Made canola oil.
Oh, wow.
Please. How they were allowed to do that blows my mind. It is disgusting what you see. I cannot believe a factory.
Isn't this actually industrial grade canola oil?
Yeah, that's like
Not
this is
food
what
grade.
canola oil looks like when you buy it at the store. Just a few steps away from being the finished process.
No, I know, but the sludge picture, that is not the precursor to food grade canola oil, is it?
Absolutely.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
Because they would have you believe that there's different grades of it.
Nope.
Okay.
That is canola oil that you consume in chips and what you
Yeah.
put to fry your steak in.
Right. Well, I don't use it on my steaks. Ooh, no.
Thank goodness. This is food. Yeah, this is like food quality.
Well,
Whatever
yeah.
that means.
The only way
That's
it's
our
getting
food.
in my system now are chips. And as I told you, yes, I went and
Nielsen's.
I went on a hit. I went out and got a hit, but I hadn't eaten Lay's like that in half a year.
Yeah.
But I do occasionally. It's like, man, I want some damn salsa.
I get it. I
And
get
I'm
it.
not just going to eat spoonfuls of it.
I know. I get it. You
It's
want
gotta
it with
be on the
something
chip.
salty and crisp when it comes on a chip. And then they come with these, where these oils get into your body and into your tissues, and the half-life of these oils are about 600 days, give or take. Half-life.
Wow, it's
So if
less than those microplastics, though.
Probably. Yeah, probably. So if you stopped eating refined oils now, you'd have half less in 2 years.
Oh, wow.
But I think the consumer doesn't want to know how
Yeah,
it's made.
you're not
And
kidding.
the yucky part of it, they just see the finished product and go, well, this is clear, so it's good for
Yeah,
me.
this looks, all kinds of better than this looks.
Right.
Lad, when we were talking about this a few weeks ago, you had an excellent question. Is like, why doesn't this smell bad when I open it? It's
Right.
canola oil smells fine. It's neutral.
Right.
Because one of the steps you see in that whole industrial process is deodorization. It smells absolutely toxically nasty. It's been heated up. It's been extracted, not only with a press, but also with chemicals. One of the chemicals they use is hexane. Not great, but that's one of the things they use. And so already this is oxidized like 400 times more than it was in just the seed form. It's already gone through that process. And one of the steps is deodorization. They make it clear. They make it look golden, like you said. Like these are industrial steps. Basically, anything that you can't do in your own kitchen to come up with a fat is something that has to go through a factory, and this is what they come up with. And this is very much like if they just decided like, we don't know if this drug is like good or bad or is going to help anybody, but rather than do a trial, we'll just let an entire population eat this and we'll just see what happens. And then people get sick, but everybody's making tons of money, so nobody's going to turn around and say, well, maybe we goofed up on our, experiment. Let's go back and take these out. It's like, no, these are the oils promoted by the American Heart Association. These are the healthiest fats you can consume because they lower your cholesterol, which they do. And again, the one time this was ever tested in a randomized controlled trial was in a mental hospital in Minnesota, where they took a group of people who were not going to leave the hospital. They were checked in and going to be there for a few years. They fed one group saturated fats, plain old butter, normal eggs, and they fed the other group polyunsaturated oils. And they found, and margarine and that kind of thing. They found that in the group who ate the polyunsaturated fats, they had lower cholesterol and a higher rate of mortality.
The PUFAs?
The people that ate the PUFAs died more.
Wow.
They had less cholesterol, but they died more. Poof. Think of it. That's a great way to think of it. A poof. That's exactly what oxidation is. A poof inside your body, and think of the chain reaction that comes from that. Rather than release the data, it didn't support what they thought, so nobody saw the data for 16 years until it was produced in a very, very unread medical journal, I believe, in Europe. The investigators in the journal and then the study said we were really disappointed with the results, and that's the reason why it was never published until very recently in 2016. Some reporter was like, hey, this study was done. Where's all the data that came from this study? And it was found in the basement of the principal investigator, who was the doctor who did the study, very much a low cholesterol person. Ivor Franz is his name. And his son had to drive to Rochester back and forth for weekends and dig through his basement, where he finally found all the data from the study that was literally buried in the basement and was released to the public finally to show that if you ate seed oils and vegetable oils, your cholesterol would go down and you would die more. Going back to if it's a cure for heart disease, but it causes twice as many strokes, is that great for you? If we know that people that eat polyunsaturated oils have a much greater likelihood of dying from violent things or having depression and all kinds of stuff. One of the doctors that does a lot of research on this.
Back up. People that eat PUFAs are more susceptible to all that?
Greater rates of depression, suicide, homicide, violence.
Wow.
Yeah, that kind of thing. One of the principal investigators who's learned a lot about seed oils in our diet, vegetable oils, his name is Dr. Chris Kenobi. He's actually an ophthalmologist, which is an eye doctor, because seed oils have been shown to be the greatest driver of what is the greatest driver of eye issues in most people, which is macular degeneration.
Mine have been floaters, and they've literally been zapped in the last 6 months by laser. But they, as I age, are becoming more and more prominent. I'm not having any of that yet that you're talking about, but still, it has had me wondering. It's like, why?
I've heard a lot of interesting stories about people changing their diet and like floaters go away.
Really?
What do you do?
Lots of that. What's that?
Take away the poly.
The PUFAs?
The PUFAs?
Yeah, so
It goes away and that helps with floaters and stuff? Or?
yeah, if you can eliminate a lot of that kind of stuff, things that you didn't think would be reversible. I hear anecdote all the time of like,
Well, that's good.
my ears used to ring. I used to have floaters or blind spots. Another guy who has done a ton of research on this. He's actually a software engineer. His name's Tucker Goodrich. He's done a lot of work on discovering why wheat, what parts of wheat cause autoimmunity. His main baby of what he studies is seed oils, and he describes in his 30s he used to call himself Mr. Whole Wheat because he would eat like all whole wheat, and he was known for it, especially in his family. But when he knew he was in trouble, he was merging onto the freeway and almost hit another car because he'd lost his periph and didn't see this car there and was like, what is going on? He had terrible allergies, terrible skin issues. Like if he has any, he'll like bleed out of his digestive system for a day or two.
Oh my God.
But he found like paleo diets and learned that if he got that out, he would cure all of that stuff and fixed him and his entire family, lost weight, all that stuff. And he also does a really, really good job of breaking down like why these things are so bad for us and what can improve when you do.
What's his name again?
Tucker Goodrich. Do I have anything?
Yes, you do.
Yeah, I do. He's on the references, so you at least have the name. Yep.
And what is the name of the person you said before that?
Dr. Kate Shanahan. Chris Kenobi. He did not make it on the resources, but he's an amazing researcher.
Okay.
He's done a lot of the same work that Weston A. Price did then. Like this last year, he traveled to the South Pacific to go check out native cultures and how they eat. He found that seed oils are starting to make into some of these cultures, and it's affecting their health. One of these tribes lived on almost exclusively sweet potatoes and carbohydrates, but didn't have a lot of seed oils. Another tribe he found lived on mostly fish and coconut oil, very less carbohydrate. He found that there wasn't any chronic disease really in either one, but the dental work from the one tribe that ate just sweet potatoes was really terrible, where the fish and coconut oil was a lot better and they were super healthy. But either one didn't have any like chronic diseases as much as we have today.
So I'm thinking that the people that were new adults, when all these studies came out, we changed the heart thing and we went to the oils, are they the ones having the ones that are still alive, higher rate of Alzheimer's, dementia, all that stuff, because they've been trying to eat this way of cutting down all this stuff, but sticking to all the high grains,
Yep.
all this stuff.
Let me see if I understand your question. When a lot of this food has been introduced to us, it wasn't like one day there was not Crisco and then the next day everybody was eating Crisco. It was gradual, right? We changed our diets very gradually. Most of us in the Western world, it wasn't like sugar was like all of a sudden none and then you had like 100 pounds a year or whatever. It was like much more gradual. So the theory goes that as we've been changing our diets around here, we've been exposed to these things for a longer period of time. So it's a much more gradual rise. As you go to some of these tribes that have been exposed to none of this, and all of a sudden you give them all of it, like where we are today, they explode. Like they get very unhealthy really, really quickly. That is a theory about why. Did that answer?
Yeah, I was just picturing my own parents who both a little bit of brain thing, but they still kept, we've got to have the cereal and all the bread.
Yeah.
And I would try to help my mom go, I don't really use that much bread anymore. Can I have half a sandwich? And eventually she started being good. And okay, I'll make you half a sandwich with lots of meat. But it was still ingrained in them that you have the grain, you have the bread, you add this oil.
You have your starch. They call it starch in their generation.
Sure.
And then sugar, they probably didn't see that sugar was a problem.
Right. Yeah. You look at the videos of people doing like, not even like military training, but like not workouts, even like playground kids and all the things they were able to do in like the 1950s and 60s. And like, they were super fit and healthy. And like, yeah, they were eating grains and breads all the time. They were having potatoes all the time. It's probably part of it is like they probably weren't having as much. It probably was nowhere near as bad as it is for people today. There wasn't like glyphosate, for example, where we spray chemicals on everything.
The processing has changed.
Process
So
has
whatever
changed.
they were doing in the 70s and 80s isn't the same as what we're doing.
Yep. Fruit was.
Wonder Bread was expensive.
That's a good point.
But
And
you're going
so
to feed your
you
children.
didn't- You had
Grandma's
okay,
whole
don't
bread.
you waste that extra.
Yeah.
So eat that slice.
Fold over your peanut butter sandwich
Yep.
and eat it.
That still sounds good to me, by the way.
Yeah.
Do you cut the crust off?
No.
You can get those Smuckers.
Uncrustables. Uncrustables.
Uncrustables.
Yep. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think that's a really great question, a really good observation. I think it's a multi-factor problem. I think our food has gotten worse. It's gotten worse really gradually. Processing has changed. Even like, you look at, when candy bars used to taste good, there were far less ingredients that are in candy bars today. Same with, cereal. They used to flavor it with different things and different dyes, which now is totally different. It would also be that people would eat 3 meals a day, and they weren't avoiding meat and dairy like they are today. Yeah, there's a lot of different kind of questions on why this stuff is so ubiquitous and why it's causing us to have such poor health. All of this today was all about like what not to eat, which is unfortunate, like pretty daunting of like, okay, well, you're basically just telling me that I shouldn't have sugar, I shouldn't have grains, I shouldn't have vegetable oil. And guess what has sugar and grain and vegetable oils? Freaking everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Exactly.
That's not fun. That sucks. I don't like to be to yuck your yum, but like that is the reality of our situation. Is like this is what happens. This is what causes all of these poor health, and this is what you're up against. Try as best you can to get foods from whole sources whenever you can.
Watermelon.
If it's a whole watermelon and it's watermelon season, and you can't get them in
all you're eating.
January, is that going to be the hill you want to die on?
What
Maybe
else
not.
do you want to do when you have a kidney stone? You want
Probably want to eat all the watermelon you can.
So is watermelon
Diet
a lot of sugar? I mean, but it's isn't it natural? I mean, do they inject it?
I mean, the fruit has been modified over time. We raise our fruits to have sugar. It's got more than it used to. Again, everybody's going to react differently. Some people use tools like continuous glucose monitors, which is something you put on your arm. It injects into your skin, but you don't feel it.
Oh, okay.
It's just has a little filament that goes into your skin,
Oh yeah.
and basically it's like pricking your blood, but it's continuous. It's constant, and so people wear them, and they work on a Bluetooth, so you can eat and you can scan your thing, and it will show you a curve over time, last 24 hours or 2 days or 5 hours. How is your blood sugar doing? And knowing that if you have lots of mountains and troughs and mountains and troughs, you want to make a really boring kind of a roller coaster ride. And so you automatically, it's an amazing tool because you will just self-correct on your own. Like, oh, wow, I just had a sandwich and my blood sugar went up to 200. I didn't know that. I'm going to try to change my sandwich. Maybe next day it's different.
Too much We Are Board for me.
Some people, yeah, right. Some people learn that watermelon crazily affects their blood sugar. Some people say water, and like they know that they eat watermelon doesn't affect their blood sugar. Like, awesome, that's a safe food for you. Everybody's different.
Yeah.
Some people, I've seen people have crazy high spikes of blood sugar with things that all of us would consider healthy, like vegetables.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that vegetables would spike your blood sugar. I've seen it do it for some people who does. So
Right.
it's individual. We have tools that you can use to find out which foods can be good for you, which foods can't. I have tried to make this whole course as diet agnostic as I possibly can. I don't want people to just go out and eat the way that I eat. I need to think critically and find the best plan for you. I also think it would be very hard to go through a lot of these lessons and not make somewhat similar conclusions of like, man, this crappy stuff is everywhere. It's really hard to get away from. For some people, you may find that you're an abstainer and you have to abstain from a lot of these foods and your life is just better. It sucks, but...
Well, I have to admit that there's a certain level of fatalism in me where I've kind of just said, well, it is so ubiquitous, you can't get away from it. I living in this culture and stuff the way it is, I'm already addicted. Well, not compared to some people, I understand. But, but it's kind of like, and I've kind of fatalistically said to me, this is the nature of the period in which I live. I'm doomed to whatever life I have as a
Fair.
consequence of this.
Fair point.
Yeah, but at the same time, do I know that an actual grass-fed steak tastes better than a processed chicken nugget? Yes. Do I, do I get an instant headache off of a Cinnabon or cinnamon roll? Yes. I mean, so it does get my attention at a certain level, but to be able to function in this culture, it's like you say, how can you possibly avoid it? You know?
It's that is the reality, and again, just like you wouldn't blame the scenario we talked about earlier. Like if we had done a better job refining cocaine than we
Right.
did refining sugar, and that became the trade rather than a sugar trade. It was the trade, the cocaine trade.
Right.
And now every day when you went to the hardware store, there was just every variety of cocaine that you liked, and the kids sell cocaine at the street in the summertime. And when we have birthdays, we celebrate by giving you a bowl of cocaine, and if you're sad, you should have some cocaine today, and
Yeah.
just have it, but only have it for breakfast, and have it for your snack, and put it in your
Right.
coffee, and then have it for lunch, and then 3 p.m. when swig is the most
Right.
popular, like
Which
let's
just
put some
blows
cocaine.
me away because it's a Larry H. Miller owned company.
Yeah, and how did he die? Type 2
Yes.
diabetes.
Oh,
Yes.
his diet. Oh my gosh.
And so it just blows me away. I mean, and that speaks to the fatalism. It's just like,
You wouldn't be blamed. I wouldn't blame you for saying like, yeah, Lad is this huge cokehead and he died of a cocaine overdose.
Right.
I get it because cocaine's he was happy using.
opium.
Died
Opium dens.
There you go.
Who did you say?
What's that?
Who did you say died of that?
Oh, Lad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're just
Yeah.
pretending.
Yes.
Pretending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, we miss you, Lad. Sorry. I wouldn't blame you, but the reality of the situation would be it was an overuse of cocaine that killed you.
Right.
That doesn't change the fact that it was
But
Right.
it was acceptable.
It was
And that's
acceptable,
it,
and
that these companies take advantage and find what we're going to be weak for
Yep.
and what we're going to be addicted for, and then they promote it because they can promote it legally.
Yep. That's right. So yes, can you be blamed? Is it fair to take a fatalist? Absolutely. How many times have you and I chatted? We're just like, screw. This is so much work.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Hard work.
For
Yes.
all the work you've done, you and I have been meeting together for 5 years. Is there ever a day? I asked you this last week. Does it ever get easier to? Do you ever want sugar less?
No.
Ever? It's brutal. It's brutal. So yeah, it's just riding the line of what is acceptable.
Right.
When pain increases, hearing improves. So it's like, does your life suck bad enough
Right.
to where this is a problem? If it's not, you could continue. Do things down the road scare you? Are you thinking about Alzheimer's, type 3 diabetes? Do I want to avoid that? Am I forgetting things today? Do I have brain fog? Am I pre-diabetic? Is my blood sugar starting to creep up? Is this an issue? Is my HDL cholesterol low? I should get on top of this. It's a chronic disease. They take decades to manifest. Like you said earlier, Lad, like the damage done by the diseases can't be reversed, but the great news is the diseases can be.
Right. And I know that. I saw that in my parents. Like you said, my mom, they got it reversed, the trajectory of it, but it had already done its major neurological neuropathy damage and stuff.
Yep.
And so while she was able to get off insulin and all that stuff, and they controlled it completely by diet, the effects.
The neuropathy was done. The mental
Yes.
damage was done.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It is an impossible, horrible, terrible problem that we have, that we're saying these are what these foods do, and this is the world that we live in. There's no easy answer. It sucks.
I predict that we'll see a new pharmaceutical industry come up that does regenerative medicine for the damage that has been done.
Probably. They're trying to find drugs for the side effects of Ozempic.
Oh my God.
Oh, they are.
Yeah.
So take Ozempic, but then they're.
Then take, of course, they've done that forever, right? Like, take this drug. Oh, well, we gave you the statin, and now you have depression. Well, here we've got an SSRI drug for that, so your depression gets better.
Yeah.
Or you could go back to think like, what did we do before Ozempic? Oh yeah, we ate lots of fats and proteins, and you could just do that, and that causes the same effect as the Ozempic, and you maintain your muscle mass, so you don't need to take a drug to try to deal with the muscle mass loss.
But that doesn't make anybody money.
That's the problem.
Yeah, but you know
Darn
what?
it.
I think
Who
part of
makes
the trick
money?
in this is getting people to where they can find the taste. Because I even knew as a kid, I hated Fleshman's margarine. My grandmother had butter in her house. Guess whose house I liked?
Yeah. The butter. I know.
So what are you supposed to do for brain fog? I noticed that lately. Lately I'm like, okay, what's that word?
That was great. No, that's awesome. It's something to be aware of, and it's early signs that you could be down a path of
Well, yeah.
insulin resistance. So you want to get on top of it, and things that we know cause inflammation in the brain would be polyunsaturated oils, vegetable oils, and sugar. Like we said before, Alzheimer's is now being called type 3 diabetes. If you can get those things down, focus on whole foods, decide what tolerance you have for which foods, how many carbohydrates you can tolerate and do okay with, and how you want to buy them and soak them and prepare them. Great. You could also, again, just focus the diet mostly on the fats and proteins. That will give you the nutrients that your brain needs. Your body takes fat, breaks it down into a fuel called ketones. The brain loves ketones and runs perfectly well and reduces inflammation in that state.
Yeah.
You could simply introduce that. We're going to have a whole episode on mental health as well, so that'll be a good one. We'll go over that. Again, was not even on my radar 5 years ago, and now we're going to do an entire thing about it. But yeah, the good news is there are things to do. The bad news is it's not that easy. I wish it were.
Right.
I've been abstinent.
Oh my God.
I've been abstinent of most carbohydrate literally for 5 years, and it's not. I mean, it's okay, but it's not the best. It sucks in social situations, and I would love to have a cake, and I would love to have a pie on Pioneer Day, and I can't. I can't do it.